Hey there. Welcome to the Pelvis Project podcast. I'm Megan.
And I'm Roxy. We're two pelvic health experts brought together by passion for our careers, entrepreneurship, motherhood, and the desire for intentional relationships.
Join us in our mission to spread pelvic floor awareness and start conversations surrounding the truth behind genuine health, imperfect wellness, and joyfully navigating life. We are so glad you are here with us.
Let's start the conversation.
All right, we're excited to be back for this episode. It's going to be a little bit spicy. So Roxy, why don't you tell us a little bit about our topic tonight?
We're going to talk about sex, sex, and the clitoris.
That's right.
We're just going to say
pause.
That. Clit.
And if everybody needs to say the word clitoris out loud, say it. And if your face turns red,
say it again.
Say it again. You might as well go ahead and say the word vagina and vulva at the same time.
And maybe penis.
That's right. We are going to get used to these words, ladies. Okay. So I think Roxy and I were just talking before we started recording, kind of what brought this up is just some conversations that we've been having in the clinic. And first off, I literally just told somebody yesterday that I was so incredibly proud of them for sharing and asking questions and speaking into their questions regarding, they're seeing me for something completely different. It's fertility related, endometriosis, that sort of thing. And also, the topic was brought up just about painful intercourse. And of course, we ask things about painful orgasm. And that brought up, her sharing some information that she had never been able to have anybody to talk to about. So, and that brought up into the topic about orgasm. So, Roxy, let's start with sharing some stats because this is actually pretty mind-blowing when you hear this.
Sure. So, believe it or not, the clitoris was not drawn out anatomically correct or anatomically understood until 2005. Guys, that's not that long ago. And then just 3 years ago, in 2022, is when we officially could number the nerve endings to the clitoris, which is an astounding 10,000 nerve endings. 10,000, y'all.
That's a lot.
3 years ago.
Yeah.
It's 3 years ago that we really learned the anatomy of the clitoris. And before that, how unfair is this? We guessed it was 8,000, and that was based off studies from bovine. That's cattle, everybody. We studied cattle clitorises, clitori, whatever, plural, to guess our own anatomy. Like, that's a problem. And that's what we really want to kind of talk about right off the get-go of it's taboo. It's uncomfortable for some people to talk about. And it's just flat out under research. We're just understanding the anatomy of this organ that every woman has. So rightfully so, we don't understand it, and it's confusing, and we feel lost and alone and isolated and unsure. And that might be a big reason why.
Yeah. And when we have something that's a taboo topic, that equals undereducated. So it's, we don't typically go into maybe our OBGYN's office and at a young age and even know to even ask these questions. And the clitoris is maybe mentioned in anatomy, but it's not talked about of its function because that equals, that brings about the fact that its sole function is pleasure. And we know that is its sole purpose, but it's not necessarily talked about or shared when we are educated because then, which this could go into a whole thing. And we have a previous episode, one of our early episodes with Lauren Scaife, who's a sex therapist. I would go back and listen to that episode if you haven't. And I would love to either bring her back or have another sex therapist on again, but just the feelings of shame and different sort of upbringings around even saying the word pleasure. So it's not educated on because it's we don't want to open the door to XYZ. And so we're not even having these conversations. So women don't even know, we don't even understand that is the one spot where that is where pleasure takes place. And our gentlemen aren't educated either. And so you go into, potentially a relationship, or let's just say, you get married and your partner, your male spouse wasn't educated and you weren't educated, and nobody nobody knows what they're doing, which is okay. However, it can lead to some feelings of shame or uncertainty or pressure, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But we see so many things come into our space that we are helping women with in conversations, and it is just a really great opportunity to we always refer out to sex therapists. And I think that there's still people just don't quite understand what sex therapists do, so we probably need to circle back with that. But it is just so like it can change again, it's life changing.
There's another kind of stat along that, just with the clitoris being just for pleasure. That's its only job. And Megan, what was it? Like 18% of women can have orgasm without clitoral
Uh-huh. Yeah.
stimulation. So that means if we really estimate, or we just kind of assume from that like 80% of women need some sort of help from clitoris
Yeah.
stimulation
Yeah.
from the sex work. And so like
Yes.
that's the norm. That's the majority of women need that
Yeah.
to help them orgasm. Yet we just discovered the nerve endings 3
I
years
know.
ago. Like
Yeah.
I just think
Yeah.
about, man, that we have a long ways to go. I think in just understanding our own anatomy, I guess, and making that more culturally appropriate
Hmm.
to educate, I guess. If you
Yeah.
think about
Yeah.
just the discrepancy there of what normal is and how many people don't even know how, they don't
Right.
know going into intimacy what's normal here.
Yeah.
Like, what do
So
I
you don't,
need?
yeah. Yeah. So you don't even know what to ask because
Sure.
we haven't been educated to know what, like, for example, we see a lot of women that come in with painful intercourse, and we hear a lot, I just thought this is how it always was or is. Like, this is just the way it is. And they just don't have any reference point to say, yes or no. And so with that, obviously pain with sex is not normal unless you are choosing to, make it painful. But it is not. And that alone, if you're having pain, of course, could potentially impact your ability to have an orgasm because your body is interpreting pain. And so therefore focus on being able to experience pleasure, but maybe not even knowing the right way to receive that. It can get very muddy. So all that to be said, we're not going to unpack this all in one podcast episode, but just that's where it is nice to like have a sex therapist and pelvic floor PT talking about it kind of together, or anybody that works in like the sexual wellness space, because, we also know that for females, one of the top things that's going to kill either arousal or desire, whatever it is like, stress. And gosh, you think about, okay, you have painful intercourse. You know that, okay, tonight I'm going to go and I'm going to have sex with my husband. And I know that this is potentially going to hurt. And then that revs up the system and then it becomes stressful. And then you have the daily stressors of life of what's my grocery list and when do I need to pick up the kids and, what email do I need to send? And so it's like you can't even focus on pleasure. So lots of things with that. But I think another thing that's really fascinating that Roxy and I were just talking about too is I can't remember where it was that I had heard this analogy. I think it might have been a sex therapist that I was listening to, but we have a lot of misinterpretation of, you know, I think like the movies and books and all the things have really skewed what actually what we need. But the vaginal canal is nerve endings, like that sensation in the vaginal canal would be like the equivalent of like a man's knee being rubbed. So that being just all that to say is like that's not where our pleasure center is. There's not those nerve endings are not. Yes, we have nerve endings in our vaginal canal, and yes, where the clitoris lies, there can be some stimulation there. But if we're just talking like insertion of the vaginal canal, that's very difficult. So anyway, just something to like sit on, food for thought on that. That if you're questioning, if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, I've never had an orgasm, or I don't know, like it feels somewhat good, but we're not quite there yet. sometimes it is. It's just a conversation about actually where you need to head and then have that conversation with your partner. So,
Yeah. So even just thinking about those conversations and working with, I mean, just a couple of patients right now come to mind that I'm working with currently of just the struggle of that cycle you're talking about of pain and then shame and
mhm.
then assumptions of what the partner thinks, and
Uh-huh.
kind of then a guarding that happens because then the patient is kind of self-preserving, like from a mental standpoint, they need to self-preserve to try to protect themselves from the shame or from the embarrassment or from the lack of pleasing the other partner, right? But it's interesting because I mean, I have several women that we're having these conversations right now, and one hasn't been able to have sex for years. One just is a cancer survivor and is like recovering from radiation. Another one just is struggling. She's never like it's always been painful, and she's never really felt like that intimacy piece is there. And really thinking about all three of these women didn't realize the clitoral anatomy, and all three had like I don't know, is that a word? Misassumptions? Whatever.
Malassumptions.
No,
Yeah.
whatever. They had these assumptions about who they needed to be as their role in the intimacy, circumstance there, and what that was supposed to look like and how that had to be, and really dialing that back to just communication of understanding, a man has way more testosterone, so he's probably going to be aroused a lot
That's right.
easier in random situations and environments and circumstances. And like you talked about that stress piece as a female and just how that dampens that. And when we're in the middle of cooking supper, like we might not feel that, we might not. And
Yeah.
there's different types of just like arousal starting points. And then talking about, we actually have other strategies as female, like we have this
Mhm.
clitoral piece of like, I just empower women. I say, you have this whole organ
Mhm.
that let's use that. And if we can be stimulating an arousing organ, even while there might be a little bit of discomfort, or, even when there might be a little bit of tension, or even when there might be a little bit of insecurity, like that's going to help when we're aroused. We let our guard down and we're more relaxed. And there's just like from a nervous system standpoint, that just supports more arousal. And so anyway, it just has been, this has been like a kind of a popular topic actually in my treatment room lately, but just thinking about, man, everyone's circumstances coming to mind right now that are right in my face, right, are all a little bit different, but it all kind of comes down to this lacking understanding, and having
Mhm.
misunderstanding about our own anatomy and about just even the topic of the different roles that and comparing and contrasting the roles of a man and a woman like during intimacy and intercourse, and kind of, yeah, just having
Yeah.
expectations that aren't happening, and then that causes division or friction or frustration or whatever. And so
Well, and I think with that too, it's like with the word expectations, it's like if we aren't educated appropriately, then we don't have realistic expectations that we can put on it. And so then we could be avoiding a lot of heartache and shame and different thoughts if we actually kind of like were educated better. And so the expectations were just different. And that is on both sides, like both to understand. And so, yeah, I mean, I've had younger girls in my room and, just again, wasn't even aware of where the clitoris was, thought it was in a just completely different spot, which is, I mean, I honestly was not surprised just because of the lack of education that women are given. And again, this takes it to another level of if we don't know our own body, we don't know our own anatomy, and then we go into a relationship and we are allowing somebody else to explore our body or touch our anatomy, and we don't even know it. Like that, this whole premise of like, okay, just from safety education, like just from a safety standpoint, like we need to be educated better on this. So again, Roxy and I were talking about maybe we can do like a series of episodes on this because I feel like you can't unpack it all, but just really the basic like starter conversation of if you have not had an orgasm or struggling or pain with orgasm or questions about orgasm or like, you know what, this brings up a lot of like, now I have more questions. Let's talk about it. Both of us, it's kind of like my premise of like with a lot of things here recently, like, let's talk about it. You've got questions, let's talk about it. So obviously Roxy and I are in Kansas, but obviously we also do virtual. And so those sorts of conversations and education sessions are easy for us to do and help support you and try to help get you to the right providers. And just knowing that the right pelvic floor therapist that has education should be able to help you in this regard.
Your homework. Take a mirror. Like, this is
Yes.
nothing. This is literally, I want you to do this. If you've never done this, take a mirror to your vulva and find your clitoris, find your clitoral hood. Find just the anatomical landmarks of who you are and who, as a female, where things are located so that you just have more confidence in who you are. It's like, that's just anatomy. It's literally anatomy. It's science. It's anatomy.
It's anatomy.
And if you feel weird about that, that's okay. And you don't have to do that. But then I would challenge you, what does make you feel, why does that feel really uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Or what are there lies or are there fears or are there perspectives that are putting up a barrier for you to look at yourself, in that way, and just to understand what's happening and what's going on and where things are located.
So we will leave with this. I cannot remember who it was that said this. I want to say it was Michelle Lyons at Publicon. But if you think about it, a man touches his penis every single day because he goes pee. And it's his anatomy and it's right there. And he looks at it every day. He touches it.
Feels it and sees it.
On our end, it's like we don't look, we don't touch, we don't talk about it. So I'm going to leave you with that so you can sit and think about it. We should be able to, at the minimum, get a mirror, like Roxy said, look, know, because also it's part of your health and you need to know what that skin looks like. You need to know if there are changes. So we will look forward to the next episode. Maybe we'll do a continuation of this topic.
We'll keep this conversation going.
Yeah, we'll definitely keep this conversation going. See you next time. Thank you so much for joining us this week on the Pelvis Project podcast. Help us continue the conversation by liking and sharing this episode with friends. And if you really want to do us a solid, leave us a review. If you'd like to follow us on social, check out the show notes for links. And remember, this week, take a deep breath and relax your pelvic floor.